When you think of Virginia Woolf, you probably think of novels like Mrs. Dalloway, right? But today, we're going to look at a totally different side of her. The radical thinker behind what might just be her most misunderstood and most explosive work.
Okay, so get this. It's 1938, war is looming over Europe, and Virginia Woolf makes this incredible statement. Her final word, the summary of her beliefs, wasn't a famous novel, but this book, a work she called her Credo. So if this was so important to her, why is it so often forgotten?
You have to remember the timing. This book came out at a moment of unbelievable tension in Europe. On the surface, it was supposed to be about how to prevent war. But the argument Woolf made was so radical for its time that it was met with, well, a storm of confusion and, frankly, hostility, even from her own friends and family.
And this is where it gets really wild. Look at this disconnect. You have Woolf who says, "This is it. This is my credo. This is the clearest I've ever been." And then you have the critics, and this includes her own nephew, dismissing it as an irrational cry of feminine anguish. Ouch. They saw an emotional, messy pamphlet. She knew she'd written a manifesto. Well, they basically thought she was getting sidetracked, Virginia, a world war is about to start. Why are you talking about women's rights? But for her, that wasn't a sidetrack at all. It was the entire point. She believed the two things weren't just connected, they were the exact same problem. And that's the core idea that everybody failed to grasp.
So let's get into that central argument. Her core idea was so far ahead of its time it's not even funny. She drew a direct, unbroken line between the intimate, private world of the family and the grand, public stage of global politics.
And if you boil it all down, this is it. This is the equation. Patriarchy in the home equals fascism in the world. Woolf's argument is that the roots of public tyranny, of dictators and war, don't start on battlefields. They start in the home, with the power a father holds over his family.
And here she is in her own words. The connection is inseparable. She argued that the same power dynamics of dominance and submission that define a patriarchal household are just scaled up to create the armies and governments of the state. The public dictator is just a private tyrant with a bigger platform.
So how did she build this incredible argument? She used a really clever literary trick. The whole book is structured as her response to 3 different letters, and each one is asking her for a donation of just 1 guinea.
The requests seem pretty straightforward, right? One for women's education, one to help women get jobs, and one for a group working for peace. But Woolf uses each of these simple requests as a launchpad for a deep, radical investigation into power itself.
And this is the crucial part. She agrees to donate the money, but on her own terms. Each guinea comes with a condition, a blistering critique of the very power structures that make the charity necessary in the first place. She asks the tough questions, like, why do women's colleges constantly have to beg for money?
Her critique was visual, too. The original book actually included 5 photographs of powerful men decked out in all their ceremonial gear. We're talking generals, judges, archbishops, the whole establishment. And these pictures weren't just illustrations. For Woolf, they were evidence.
Woolf's commentary here was just dripping with satire. You can almost hear her rolling her eyes. She sees their elaborate outfits not as symbols of honor or dignity, but as a kind of peacock-like vanity. It was all a performance, a display designed to reinforce an exclusive boys' club and keep women out.
So after tearing down this whole structure of male power, Woolf doesn't just say, "Okay, now let's get women into those fancy uniforms." Nope. She proposes something way more radical. For her, to just join that procession is to become part of the very system you're trying to fight.
Instead, she imagines this concept, the outsider's society. Now, this isn't a formal club, it's more of a philosophy, a way of life for independent women to push for change while intentionally remaining outsiders to that whole patriarchal game. And the principles are a direct challenge to the system's values. You refuse its honors. You don't just assimilate into professions, you change them from the ground up. And the foundation for all of it is earning your own living. Economic autonomy is non-negotiable. She even argues for a state wage for motherhood to guarantee that autonomy. And if that focus on money sounds familiar, it should. It connects directly back to her most famous essay, A Room of One's Own. That 500 pounds a year a woman needed for creative freedom? Well, in 3 guineas, that same economic independence becomes the engine for political change.
So why does a book that's over 80 years old still feel so powerful and, honestly, so ahead of its time? It's because Woolf's fundamental questions about power and how we challenge it are the exact same questions we're still grappling with today.
The parallels are just striking. Her critique of all that splendid attire It sounds a lot like how we talk about the symbols of corporate and political power today. Her analysis of being excluded from professions, it's the foundation for our entire conversation about systemic barriers and the glass ceiling. And her core idea, linking private and public tyranny, that's the essence of the feminist slogan, "The personal is political." She was there decades early.
Ultimately, what the critics in 1938 totally missed is that Three Guineas isn't just about feminism or war. It's a fundamental challenge to how we even think about power. Woolf wasn't just asking for a seat at the table. She was asking if the whole table needed to be thrown out and rebuilt from scratch.
And that leaves us with her urgent question, one that feels just as relevant now as it did then. When you're faced with a corrupt system, is it better to try and change it from the inside? Or do you need to become an outsider, refuse to participate, and dedicate yourself to building something entirely new?